Recorded live from Portland, Oregon, it's the Transamorous Network podcast. Let's get it on. Welcome back to the Transamorous Network. We are talking with Sarah McBride, who is inspiring us with her amazing life story. And Shannon asked a fantastic question. Shannon, why don't you ask that question one more time?
Well, right before we went to break, I was experiencing this incredible emotion that Sarah's story had invoked in me. And emotion is one of the most powerful things we have in our lives. And so I was asking Sarah, how did you use this to help steer your life? And how can we, as the people who are hearing and feeling your story, use that emotion to help guide our lives? Like, some kind of short takeaway.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it underscored the stakes of this fight and the stakes for our community. That lives are at stake in both sort of literal ways, but also in figurative ways, right? Mm-hmm. Like if people aren't able, every day that a person isn't able to live their life wholly and completely and authentically, it is another day that we're not actually living. And so, for me, it, as I said before, underscores the urgency of this fight. It underscores the urgency of making sure that we build a world where every single person feels safe and comfortable and affirmed in who they are and able to be who they are. And, not to be cliche, but we need that kind of understanding in this fight. We, for so long, the trans community has been ignored, and then we felt like a burden. And now we're finally feeling like we have the allies that we need to push equality forward, regardless of what the political circumstances look like over the next several years. We finally feel like we have the allies for this fight, and we need those allies to feel the passion and that urgency as we move forward, the same way they feel about gay rights, the same way they feel about other efforts for equality. And if there's an avenue into that through my story and through the stories of others, which I firmly believe is the case, that personal stories are what open hearts, change minds, and give people the fuel and passion to work and to fight and to march, then I hope it can do that. But I think, what I would say is that we can't be impatient enough. We can't be passive. We can't revel in what feels like quick change, because for those of us who are living it every day, for folks who are still in the closet and desperate to come out, but who see a world where they won't be respected and affirmed and safe, that change can't come fast enough. Mm-hmm. And so, we need folks to love and affirm trans people individually in their own lives. That is an incredible and important foundation. We need people to see us, obviously, as who we are, but we also need people who aren't transgender to engage in this movement, because if we are only creating enough space for those specifically in our lives, then we're going to be leaving a lot of people behind. And so, I just urge folks, if they want to be friends to a transgender person, that also includes being an ally and an advocate for the trans community.
So I want to take that, everything that you just said, said. and deepen it a little bit for the individuals that are watching, mm-hmm. who don't necessarily have the benefit of the stories. And I really would like to dive into the stories that may be running in the background for you, that you might be able to make conscious for yourself, that have created the life that you have, because you have, notwithstanding the tragic nature of the relationship you had a beautiful relationship.
Yeah.
And notwithstanding the fact that you're transgender, you have a life that many people would admire or be jealous of, given the stature of what you do professionally, and the circles you run in, and the potential that you have in front of you because of where your path has led. So my question is, so if you think about a transgender person or a male like myself who is attracted to someone like you, who is sitting in their house thinking, I could never meet a person like this being you, or a trans woman saying, I could never have a relationship like she just had, or she just described. I will never meet someone like that.
I will never get to where she is in her life.
Exactly.
Be as successful.
So what is it about your background, Sarah, that had you, if I may be presumptuous as to conclude this, come up with stories that had you be able to do the things you've done that get you where you are today, that has you where you are today?
That's a really good question. And I think I'll sort of start by acknowledging a lot of the privileges that I came into my life with, right? The fact that so much of the opportunity and sort of just general professional and financial security that I have is a byproduct of my white privilege and the economic privilege of my family and the educational opportunities that I was given both before and after transitioning and coming out. So I want to preface this by saying, you know, I have to be fully aware of that, and I think people should be fully aware of those opportunities, fortunes, and luck and privilege that they carry with them.
But, you know, rich or poor, the fact that you have family support, I think, is an amazing part of the foundation. Like the support and love. Like you mentioned your father, which means you're obviously still in contact with him. You know what I mean? Like that you have a relationship with your family, that they threw this wedding for you and stuff like that, I think is an amazing part of that belief foundation.
Agreed. And that made probably one of the largest, if not the largest difference in my own life. You know, in coming out and not losing my friends at school, my friends in Delaware, and my family. And with it, a lot of the things that I mentioned before that come with that, right? The continued educational opportunities that I had, the financial security as a college student that I kept, the just sort of love and positivity that continued to surround me in my life. That was a huge driver for me. And so, you know, I want to acknowledge that a lot of this is out of my own sort of was not necessarily my own choosing. And I don't want to remove any individual agency, because that's not the case. I just want to acknowledge that, because there are people who do everything that I've done, who work just as hard as I do, and they still face barriers and challenges and walls that keep them from having the financial security or professional security or whatever that I have for themselves. But I think for me, I think the number one thing that I've done that has contributed to the relationship that I was able to have with Andy, the ability to have a professional career that, again, is still very wrapped up in I have a professional career that's wrapped up in my trans identity, and I think that's easier to succeed in than maybe someone who's trying to succeed in a profession that where they are literally the only trans person maybe at their company, or that has nothing to do with their trans identity. But I think for me, the number one thing that I carry with me is that vulnerability is a really powerful thing. And that sometimes the best and only way to secure power is through vulnerability first, and allowing yourself to be vulnerable and seeing vulnerability not as a weakness, but as a strength, as a source of power. I think that that's been true in my relationships and in my relationship with Andy. I think it's been true to the degree that my advocacy work can be effective. It's in that. And I think in maintaining the relationships that I have, keeping that vulnerability, because I think empathy is the most powerful human emotion. Mm-hmm. And when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable in front of others, empathy usually wins out.
So Sarah, it's I'm not trying to offend, but I'm thinking from the standpoint of the viewer. So when someone says vulnerability is the most powerful thing, that's a great thing to say. But what does it look like? So can you give me an example of something in your life where you express that vulnerability?
But to me, it sounds like she has vulnerability with a faith that that's going to be okay, to let yourself be open and to be vulnerable. Because, she doesn't have that, or appear to have that conflicting story that if I make myself vulnerable, I'm going to get run over.
Well,
if I make myself vulnerable, I'm going to be
and so maybe
just
the
sheer way
whatever.
that Sarah lives her life, I think, is the
but I think I think a story of being vulnerable could be more illustrative for the person watching the show than us talking about vulnerability, because some people might think, well, vulnerability means I have to let that person stomp all over me, or vulnerability.
And that's what I'm saying, is having a story, a different story that goes beyond that or underneath that vulnerability. What you interpret or your definition of vulnerability, I think, will make a huge difference in that feeling.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for me that vulnerability has is not. Yes, it's not letting someone walk all over me or someone else. It's not putting up a front. It's not hiding what makes me scared. It's not hiding what makes me sad. It's not hiding what makes me feel any kind of emotion, right? It's I think so often as trans folks, we and I felt this way. We want to go out into the world and demonstrate strength and put up an incredibly strong sort of facade for the world to see. And I think obviously everyone knows what's best for them, and if that is what makes you feel sort of mentally healthy, I think that's important to do. I think for me though, individually, allowing myself to not put up that front has to sort of lead with authenticity, to work with authenticity, to express myself in ways that allow people to bridge the empathy divide between cisgender folks and transgender folks, has been really important for me in my work and in my professional life and in my relationships.
So does that mean? I'm sorry, I want to get more to an example.
Yeah, I'll give an example, but it's going to be in my advocacy world, not necessarily in my.
That's okay.
But when I started, when I came out as trans, I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, and I had always wanted to return to Delaware after I graduated from college. It was my dream. But at the time, Delaware had no statewide law against discrimination based on gender identity. And so one of the things that I was really resolved to changing was Delaware's non-discrimination law to include gender identity and expression. I had worked for our governor. Before I had come out, he and I were very close. He and I met and sort of resolved to try to change this. And so my second semester of college, senior year, half the week I would spend in Delaware going office by office by office with state legislators in Delaware. And when I initially started, I wanted to do this thing where I came in and tried to talk to them about this issue in a very sort of matter-of-fact, this is good public policy. Here's why your fears are unfounded because of this fact and this fact and this fact. Here's why this policy is good policy because of this fact, and this fact.
And it bounced right off.
I just did not, they did not digest it. It didn't move them. It didn't carry the weight that I was hoping it would. And I did that, I think, in part to sort of disassociate myself from the very personal nature, emotional nature of the work that I was trying to do, right? Like I'm advocating for my basic dignity and who I am. And that's an emotionally taxing and exhausting experience. Yeah. And so I sort of went into these offices trying to be the sort of objective observer or objective expert. And it took me a little bit of time to get to a place to both understand that was not really, like I'd go in with my mom and she'd cry and I'd be there sort of matter-of-factly talking, and I'd say afterwards, I'd say, God, it felt like you really got through to them. And partly because she's a cisgender woman who's a parent and they were cisgender parents. And so they could relate on that level, but it really felt like that she had gotten through to them. And I was just like, I didn't feel like I contributed much. And it took me some time to realize they don't want to hear that, right? Like I need to talk to them as a person who's laughs and cries, hopes and dreams, fears and loves just like they do. And to talk about how this public policy isn't the right policy because of abstract economic principles of tapping everyone's talents or or some kind of necessarily economic advantage for the state or something like that, but rather I needed to talk to them about how I was scared to come home, that I'm fearful when I go out to a restaurant with my parents that someone's going to kick me out of the restaurant, that I don't feel safe in my own home state, and to be vulnerable and express it authentically to these legislators. That was the only reason why my individual advocacy was, I think, particularly effective in that state, coupled with my family. And so for me, it was sort of a formative experience to recognize that, I had to be vulnerable. I had to feel weak in front of these legislators in order to gain the power and strength of political equality in that state, of legal equality in that state. And so I think what works in politics oftentimes is the same things that work in our own lives. And with Andy's cancer, I think I would always try to put on a strong face around him, and I think that was important. But at first I kind of wanted everyone to gain strength from me, right? I would be the sort of pillar of calm and strength, not just for Andy, but for his friends, for his family, for my family, for everyone.
I can so relate.
And then someone showed me this graph of sort of the grief circle, right? Where everyone can grieve out, but you can't grieve in.
Mm.
And so Andy was at the center of the circle. He could grieve out to everyone. Then I was the next layer of that circle. And you can't grieve in. So I couldn't grieve. I couldn't stress. I couldn't cry to Andy, but I could cry outwards. And I needed to realize that it was okay to cry outwards, to be vulnerable outwards in order to get the strength and support from those folks to carry through and to give the care I needed to Andy. So I think those are sort of both a personal and political example of just like understanding that it's important to be open and authentic in how you feel. And that authenticity, that vulnerability, that openness is I think the gateway to being able to secure what you need, get what you need to survive, to do what you need to do well. And that it won't always work out, but it's, I think, a necessary foundation.
Awesome.
I love it.
I love it too. Do you want to talk about our sponsor?
We are sponsored by The Velvet Rope, Portland's adult premier sex positive social club. You can find them at www.thevelvetropedx.com. And if you mention that you heard about them from us, you will get 50% off your membership fees. And that's www.thevelvetropedx.com.
So if you're visiting Portland, Oregon, listeners and viewers, please feel free to visit the Velvet Rope. Say hi. Oh, actually, Remy doesn't work there anymore. I was going to say hi to Remy, but...
Well, I'm on a hiatus at the moment.
Okay. Well, if you're in Portland, come visit the Velvet Rope. And if you want to reach out to one of the three of us, maybe we'll take you out for a drink there or have you on the show even. Awesome. All right. We could go on for hours.
Right. Which means we should probably wrap it up.
Exactly. Sarah, really want to thank you for being on the show. Wow. You provided some fantastic insight for people, I think.
Very inspiring.
Yeah,
very inspiring.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
for being open and vulnerable about your personal self. Mm-hmm. Like, we didn't want to talk about your political career. We didn't want to talk about that. Right. We want to talk about you as a person and as a trans woman and the love that you shared with Andy and how that has shaped you and your life and created the story that's continuing to go up as from what we can see from here.
Yeah.
Well, first I want to thank you all for the show and continuing this conversation. It's such an important conversation to have. We need, as trans people, we need to be loved to be able to carry on, just to have the full lives that we dream of and we fight for. But thank you for having me on and allowing me to share in such a safe space these stories and these experiences. And I think, to your point, the political is personal for us. And I've sort of come to terms with that and realized that we need that I have the privilege and the opportunity to share my story and hopefully help. And a little sort of exclusive plug, I'm actually, without giving too much away, I'm going to be I'm writing a book about these experiences and the fight for trans equality. So keep an eye out for that and for news around that coming soon.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back on the show when that unfolds.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and promote your work.
Book drop.
Great. And it's kind of weird on this show to talk about men stepping up, but we do need to do a call to action.
Always. Well, I think today's call of action should be to everybody. Step up, be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Open yourself up without giving away your power.
Yeah.
And, you can find anything that you're looking for.
Very good. Very good, Rami. All right, listeners, tune in next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you.